Canada and the U.S. today are among those pushing to prevent a wider war in the Middle East after Iran launched 181 ballistic missiles on Israel yesterday, following 2 weeks of escalating conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. How might Israel retaliate, and what are the prospects of a conventional war between Iran and Israel? With me now to talk about that, former Chief of Defence Staff of the Canadian Military, General Tom Lawson, and former Commander of the Canadian Navy, Vice Admiral Mark Norman. Hello to both of you. I appreciate you making the time. General Lawson, I'll start with you. How much more likely do you think a conventional war is today versus, let's say, a week or two ago even?
Well, let's put it this way, Vassy. I think there are options available to Prime Minister Netanyahu that really weren't feasible after the attack in April that Iran carried out. Back then, the Prime Minister was very unpopular with the people of his nation. They saw him as largely responsible for what took place on October 7th, having lost focus on the Hamas threat. At the same time, the Americans who were assisting in the aftermath of October 7th were putting very great pressure, Biden and all diplomats from the States, great pressure on the Prime Minister to really minimize any return against Iran. But that's not where we are now. Several months later, we see that after the attacks, the very successful attacks on Hezbollah with the pagers and the walkie-talkies, as some of the prestige has returned to the Mossad, Israeli military, and it reflects also in Netanyahu, and the polls are showing he's popular. That gives him some options. And of course, United States, both parties are swept up in an election right now, and the winning hand these days is to support Israel. So that provides Netanyahu with options he didn't have before, one of which could be to direct all of his focus on finally dealing with what he sees as his most strategic threat, Iran.
Yeah, and I think it's even, in my view, maybe perhaps even more granular than that, Admiral Norman. The question I feel like at this moment is, will Israel go directly to the nuclear facilities in Iran? Comments from Joe Biden, the president of the U.S. today, saying the U.S. won't back that. Does that hold weight, do you think? What are the prospects of that kind of retaliation?
Yeah, well, I think, General Lawson's comment with respect to optionality is really useful. They have a range of options. I think this is why you haven't seen an immediate response. I think they're looking at this very carefully. It's been clear all along that Iran has been a provocateur in this entire situation certainly for the last year, but long before that. They've been acting through proxies, and Israel is, capable of dealing. They've known for a long time that if things got really tough, they were going to be fighting a war on multiple fronts, and they're in what I would describe as their sort of worst case, but probably most likely scenario from a military planning perspective. And so the idea, look, they could preemptively strike, I think, whatever they chose to. Sure, is that, here's the problem with what we're seeing, and it's not just here in the Middle East, we're seeing this elsewhere. The lines that we have traditionally or historically considered as uncrossable are becoming increasingly fuzzy. And I'm not suggesting that it is or isn't a good idea. I'm just saying that the calculus is evolving literally on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. There is no question that Iran is an existential threat. They have been. They've made it very clear that as far as they're concerned, Israel is the problem. This is a provocative action by Israel, not just to bloody their nose, but more importantly, to try and provoke them into a more aggressive stance, which then, of course, paints Israel as the bad guy. We're seeing some very disturbing shifts in Western social media and public opinion with respect to how Israel is perceived in this whole thing. And, my instinct is that notwithstanding Israel's legitimate right, as the Prime Minister said, to defend themselves, I think they're going to be very strategic about what they choose to do in this context. And Netanyahu himself has said they're going to pay a price. I think that in and of itself is it's not just an idle threat. It's going to be real, and they have lots of options they can go to. short of attacking their nuclear facility, which, to be honest,
Right.
nobody wants them to have anyway. So, they would be doing the broader world community a bit of a favor, but I'm not encouraging that as a military action.
Yes, certainly would I imagine prompt another reaction, and et cetera, et cetera. If
Correct.
I could just before, if I could just before I let you both go, I wanted to ask, because of your vast expertise in this area, as we watch things escalate, particularly in Lebanon, about the prospects of an evacuation of tens of thousands, potentially Canadians. We're certainly not at that point right now. The government has got seats on flights that, there's not a huge demand for, to be totally transparent. They've been urging people to leave for the last year. We all remember 2006 and the difficulties in that evacuation effort. General Lawson, if I could ask you first, what is the primary lesson learned that might have to be implemented should the need arise this time?
Well, I mean, lots of lessons were learned logistically by the Canadian military and diplomatic corps. I think what we have to keep in mind, regardless of the fact that most Canadians look across and think that it's just a bad decision for any Canadian passport holders, I think 50,000 Canadians in Lebanon right now to still be there, and many may think they should have to live with the decisions they took. Fact is that holding a Canadian passport comes with a significant number of privileges, one of which is when you're in deep peril, the government will bend over backwards and go a long way to make sure they do everything they can to get you to safety. And that can be anywhere from doing what they're doing right now, and that is block booking all kinds of flights out, to booking a ship to head into a port there and get everybody out. And it's a remarkable thing, and it makes you proud to be a Canadian.
Admiral Norman, last word to you. My understanding from speaking with the defense minister over the weekend is there is at least a ship that would do just that, bring Canadians essentially from Lebanon to Cyprus. What is the capacity for our resources to be able to do that, in your view?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about a Canadian warship, it's extremely limited. But if we're talking about a commercial vessel taken under contract, perhaps a cruise ship or something similar, you can move large amounts of people fairly efficiently. But to General Lawson's point, that one of the things we saw in the previous experience was that people don't want to leave until they're forced to leave. So it's not surprising that we're not seeing early adopters, if I can put it that way, of the offers. But I think, this is a significant logistical challenge. There were some really good lessons learned, and there are mechanisms by which this can be done safely and efficiently. And, I wish the folks all through the capital, Ottawa, who are trying to plan out these scenarios, all the best. This is a tough situation. And, the Canadians in Lebanon, they're pretty hardy. That they came from literally decades of disruption, and I'm hoping that they'll decide to stay, not because we don't want them to come to Canada or come home, but because the situation gets resolved. But that's a conversation for another day.
For sure. And I hope to lean on your expertise, both of your expertise, again, for that additional conversation. I'll leave it on that note. Thank you very much, both of you. Appreciate it. General Tom Lawson and Vice Admiral Mark Norman. Thank you.